Hello and welcome back. Today we have a new kind of format for the video. We are doing a set review specifically for Aetherdrift and more specifically for the multicolored commanders. We'll do a separate video for the monocolored commanders that, basically appeared in the set, all these new legendary creatures. And we're basically just going to touch on each of them pretty quickly, determine if we feel like they themselves could serve as a solid commander or if they belong in the 99. Now, before we get started, we're going to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Arcane Fortress, makers of fine TCG accessories including deck boxes, sleeves, playmats, and more. But more about them at the end of the video. So, let's dive on in. Starting off this list is Mendicant Core Guidelight. So this is an Azorius commander. They are a star 3, where star is going to be equal to the number of artifacts we control. So, a lot of things going for Mendicant, right? 1, super cheap to play, right? 2 mana. By turn 3, they're guaranteed to be out, but I feel like we could pretty consistently get them out in the deck by turn 2. They have the Start Your Engines mechanic, which I really want to play with. I haven't been doing a ton of Standard through Arena recently, ever since Aetherdrift came out, just due to other obligations and whatnot. So I haven't really gotten to mess with it outside of the pre-release. But once you reach max speed, whenever you cast an artifact spell, you can pay a single mana of any color, and just go ahead and copy that spell. So good. So I think that Mendicant Core Guidelight is a phenomenal commander. I'm actually building a deck for it myself. And I think that there is a ton of potential. One, in just obviously copying things and having a massive artifact creature army, or just a lot of oh, I have multiples of these mana rocks, what have you. But also, there are a number of ways to basically let us fill up our grave and cast artifacts from there. We get to cast artifacts off the top of our deck. There's just a ton of artifact support out there, and I think Mendicant Core Guidelight is phenomenal and an easy build around. Winter Cursed Rider follows them up. So Winter is another cheap little guy, right? So this is a Dimir commander. Again, just 2 mana. They are a 3/2 with ward, pay 2 life. Liking it so far. Artifacts we control have ward, pay 2 life. Okay, a little protection for our board. I can dig it. They have an exhaust ability, right? This is another new mechanic from Aetherdrift, which we can only activate 1 singular time. Granted, if our commander dies and comes back, or gets flickered in some way, we have some options here to reactivate it. But for 4 mana, so that's 2 and a little bit of Dimir, we tap them down. We exile X artifact cards from our grave. Each other non-artifact creature is going to get -X until end of turn. So a nice sort of board wipe. I think that there is some potential here as hey, look, as I build up my massive board, we are definitely a little not weak to board wipes, right? Because a board wipe does, to an extent, fill up our grave to allow us to activate the exhaust ability. But although I like them, I don't like them as much as the Mendicant Core Guidelight, so I'm going to probably put them 1 step down. I didn't know we were ranking these, but now we are. I do like them, though. I think that this is a solid choice for a commander. And there are obviously ways of ripping things out of exile back into graveyards and whatnot. I think we're going to have a good time. Far Fortune and Boss follows up those two. For 4 mana, 2 in Rakdos, we get a 4/5 Legendary Human Mercenary with Start Your Engines. Whenever we attack, not specifically with Far Fortune and Boss, but just any creature in general, we get to ping each opponent for 1 damage. Nice, right? Loving it. At max speed, which we're going to be at least speed 2 the first time we attack, And we're going to play basically every speed card we can just to, like, take advantage of the fact that we're going to be speedy very quickly. But at max speed, we get to deal 1 extra damage every time we deal damage to anything. Redshift Rocketeer Chief follows up that end boss. So, 2 mana again, so we're loving that. 2/3 with Vigilance, also pretty decent, right? They tap to add mana of 1 color based on their power, which we can only spend on activated abilities. They do have an exhaust ability that lets us put a number of permanents from our hand out onto the field. That ability is 12 mana, which is kind of crazy expensive. We're not really here for that second ability, we're really here for that first ability. And really, we just want to pump Redshift Rocketeer Chief up as much as possible, make them nice and beefy, and then basically activate activated abilities all day, with a copious amount of mana. So this definitely feels very +1/+1 countery. Maybe you go in an equipment route. Moving on, we have Caradora, Heart of Alacria. So Caradora is great in my mind. I built a deck around them already. I did a deck tech on it last week. I want to say it was last week's video. But the ability to tutor up any creature or not creature or vehicle, but mount or vehicle, the mounts are creatures, but I digress, is a chef's kiss moment. Having a potentially repeatable tutor in the command zone to find you answers to situations. Granted, those answers have to be limited to mount or vehicles, but mounts and vehicles are pretty diverse. I feel like there's a lot of answers in them, so I'm pretty happy with it. The +1/+1 counter synergy on top is icing on that cake. They could also obviously be a solid commander. Unfortunately, I don't feel like the same could be said for this next creature, which is Lagorin, Soul of Alacria. So, Lagorin definitely feels like a friend of Caradora. They actually feature each other in their art. They are a flying beast mount. Whenever they attack while saddled, they get some counters. And the saddle cost is low. They obviously synergize really well together. And, that's all that really needs to be said. I just don't feel like they make sense as a commander in their own right. I think that, if you're going to play those colors and you're going to do a mount vehicle deck, Caradora makes way more sense. Ketramose, the New Dawn, follows that up. We've actually stopped ranking things. I forgot all about it. Don't worry about it. But Ketramose, the New Dawn, right? This is a 3-cost, 4/4, Menace, Lifelink, Indestructible God, right? Keyword soup, we love it. Now, it cannot attack unless there are... It cannot attack or block unless there are at least 7 cards in exile. In terms of exiling things, there are a bunch of things in white that do it. But also, whenever one or more cards are exiled from the board or the grave, during our turn, we get to lose a life and draw a card. And therein lies our real value. So, Ketramose, the New Dawn is looking to play creatures that have strong ETBs that we could flicker. White has access to so many flicker effects, which is going to keep our hand nice and full. And with things like Skyclave Apparition and some other ways of, we have swords, we have Path to Exile, we have access to black, so we could very easily actually just exile things from our opponent's grave as well. Especially with some of the new things that came out in Duskmourn. I think Ketramose is a phenomenal option. And the fact that they have that lifelink means that they are going to offset the life we're losing for this card draw. But as always, life is a resource, and guess what? You should be spending it. Zahur, Glory's Past, follows that up. This is another cheapie, right? Just 2 mana gets you out. A 3/2 Zombie Cat Warrior with Start Your Engines. So, seen quite a few Start Your Engines style commanders. And I think that this one is pretty decent. It's definitely an Orzhov aristocrat-y reanimation strat. I don't think it's the best one out there, but I definitely think you could build around it if you really wanted to. So, start your engines. Like I said, we're going to have at least speed 1. We get sacrifice creatures once per turn to Surveil 1, right? We're going to fill up our grave as we sack creatures. And at max speed, whenever a non-token creature we control dies, we have to create a 2/2 zombie. So I think that overall, it's decent, right? I don't think that I would probably choose it as a commander over anything else that I would have options to run as an Orzhov, kind of aristocrat-y reanimation strat, but they're doing okay. Captain Howler sees Scourge, follows them up. So Captain Howler is looking to wheel and deal, honestly, right? 4 mana, 5/4, ward, 2 mana, and 2 life, right? Pretty expensive to target him. I think for the most part your opponents are just going to leave him be. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, a target creature you control gets a little bigger for each card discarded. So +2, +0 for each card discarded. Whenever that creature deals combat damage, you get to draw a card. It has to be to a player. So we have card draw tacked onto our commander, potentially. And blue and red have just so many ways to wheel away your entire hand. You know, a ton of cycle effects. But I think the smart way to play it is honestly making Captain Howler himself kind of unblockable. Tons of ways to do it. And hitting hard, hitting fast, and just knocking people out with commander damage. A+, definitely a good commander. I'm going to butcher this next name. Bear with me. Aatchik. Aatchik. I don't know. But Emerald Radian. So they are a little more on the expensive side. They are actually the most expensive commander we've seen so far at 6 mana. They are a 3/3 for 6 mana, which is like, wow, they need to have a really good effect, or why are we running them? And it's like, that's fair. Let's see what they do. Whenever it enters, you're going to create a 1/1 token insect for each artifact and or creature that is in your grave. Now, we are in Golgari, so we are doing a lot of graveyard shenanigans. I don't think that filling up our grave with creatures or artifacts is that difficult. Whenever an insect we control dies, each opponent will lose 1 life, and our commander gets a little bigger. I don't know that I care that our commander is getting all that much bigger. They don't have any kind of evasion in the form of trample or flying. It's nice, right? Don't get me wrong. And there are ways of obviously making it unblockable on our own. We could definitely lean into a kind of Voltron-y +1/+1 counter, self-sacrifice deck, self-mill deck. But it feels a little clunky, right? It definitely feels like more of a payoff card than a setup to do a thing card. And personally, for myself, I prefer setup to be in the command zone over a payoff. But maybe that's just me. That's my play style. That being said, I'd probably put it in the 99 of a deck that's doing a lot of self-sacrifice. Possibly Beladros Witherbloom, a deck that I did a deck tech on way back in the day. So Emerald Radian, not quite for me. Both because of the fact that it's 6 mana for 3/3, which isn't great. And yeah, it probably produces you a ton of bodies, so the stats are probably justified there. But it's not my cup of tea. Kolodin Triumph Caster. So this is another cheapie, right? This is a Boros Commander 2/3 that cares about mounts and vehicles. They are a human pilot. our mounts and vehicles have haste. The turn that they enter, they're basically turned on for the moment, right? So our mounts are considered to be saddled the turn they enter, and our vehicles are considered to be crewed, effectively. So we are in white. We could do flicker things just to make sure that our mounts are always saddled, that our vehicles are always crewed. There's value here. Definitely not my favorite. He definitely could be a commander. I'd probably give him like a B. He's a B tier commander in my mind. I could be wrong, right? I could be an idiot. Who knows? Sab-Sunen Luxa Embodied follows him up, though. So this is a Simic commander. Simic was the original colors that I started building decks in, so it has a special place in my heart. But this is a 6/6 Reach, Trample, Indestructible God for 5 mana. So it's honestly kind of Simic doing Simic things, which is +1/+1 counters. Now, they can't attack or block unless they have an even number of counters on them. 0 is considered to be even, so they could block the first turn that they come out. Beginning of your first main phase, they do get a counter in the form of a +1/+1 counter on them. Then if it has an odd number of counters, you draw 2 cards. So effectively, you don't put in any support for this, right? You just run the commander as is. We're not giving it extra counters. We're just letting it get a little bigger each turn. You effectively draw 2 each turn on average, right? You have your regular draw. You have half a draw based on whether or not you are odd or even. So already like them. It is important to note that it cares about the number of counters and not specifically the number of +1/+1 counters. So I think that this actually has a ton of potential to be an interesting, I don't just make numbers go burr, I care where those numbers are at, Simic commander. Now there are a ton of ways, especially in blue, as well as some decent colorless support, to move counters about, to proliferate counters, things of that nature. And in my mind, your ideal setup would be to always ensure that the +1/+1 counter that you're getting at your first main phase is going to let you draw those 2 cards. And then you have a way of giving them an extra counter, right? It doesn't have to be the +1/+1. You could proliferate something else. You could just give them some other kind of counter. Plenty of counters to go around. I think they're decent. They can go back up in the 8 category. It's like we're grading, we're ranking. What are we doing, Mac? I don't know. But what I do know is that Sita, Varma, Masks, Racer follows them up. This is another little dinky guy, right? So Human Rogue 2/3 for Simic has an exhaust ability. So X, 2 green and a blue, has you put X +1/+1 counters on them, and then each of your creatures have a base power and toughness equal to Sita Varma's for the turn. This is definitely an explosive win kind of deck in my mind, right? You're kind of going wide, likely with tokens, which Simic is great for. You dump a stupid amount of mana into Sita Varma Masked Racer. Ideally, you have a Champion of Lambholt out on the field already, which would allow you to be like, hey, look how big my Champion of Lambholt is, regardless of whether or not it has counters. Now you can't block any of my creatures, and they're all big. I swing at you each and win. That being said, I don't know that I love them as a commander. I feel like the game plan is kind of always the same. I think that they work better in the 99, so that's where I'm going to put them. Samut, the driving force. So Samut is another on the more expensive side. This is a 6-cost, 4/5, first strike vigilance haste commander with start your engines. So right off the bat, we're getting a little bit of speed. I kind of love them though. So other creatures we control get +X/+O, where X is their speed. So they will max out at +4/+O for our entire field aside from themselves, which is pretty decent. Non-creature spells we cast cost X less to cast, where X is our speed. A mana reduction of 4 mana is phenomenal. I think the obvious way to play this deck is big green, red, and white spells that generate tokens. We're going to get a discount based on our speed and just kind of run away with it. I don't know what else really need to be said, right? I mean, is anyone doing anything else with Samut aside from go wide tokens at discount rates that come in beefier than ever? I wouldn't think so. Loot the Pathfinder. So I actually pre-ordered this off of TCG Player. It's not in yet. A little sad. Hopefully it shows up today? Question mark. I actually overpaid for it though. I think I paid like $15 to pre-order it, and now it's down to being like a $5 card. So maybe don't pre-order things. But either way, Loot is a 2/4 double striking vigilance hasty beast noble with 3 distinct exhaust abilities. That being said, we have ways of doing shenanigans with him, and I think the most hilarious shenanigan is honestly like an Agatha's Soul Cauldron, right? So we have Loot out on the field where we've done all his exhaust abilities, we throw him into the grave, and we're doing +1/+1 counter shenanigans for the rest of our board, and really just making it so we have a bunch of things that have the ability to add a bunch of mana, to draw us a bunch of cards, to deal damage to any target. Really wish he was in white, though. Just for the flicker, so I could abuse him without having to kind of be a risky biscuit situation. He is in blue-green, so we do have access to a lot of clone-style effects that can get around the legend rule for us, but not my ideal way of basically trying to build him. And the last of our multicolored commanders is the Mimeoplasm, Revered One. Now, I always call it Mimeoplasm, right? But I've heard it called Mimeoplasm. So, am I wrong, or other people wrong? Please let me know in the comments. But this is an X cost with some soul ties slapped onto the end. 0/0. As it enters, you exile up to X creature cards from your graveyard, and it will enter with 3 counters for each one exiled this way. Then, for 2 mana, you could have it become a copy of one of those creatures, only it's a 0/0 with the ability. So, it's a nice way of basically having a bunch of creatures on the board at once, all in one body, right? You definitely want to have things that are like, oh, I'm hexproof. Oh, I have good wards. I'm indestructible. All kind of stacked beneath him with other good abilities. And it definitely feels very Voltron-y in my mind, right? In that sense. I think they're interesting. I'd probably run them as a commander. I don't think we ended up pulling one from our box. And it's definitely not the greatest soul tie commander of all time. But it's definitely interesting. And I think worth checking out. This is my first time doing these reviews. Everything is kind of off the cusp. So if you want me to go into more detail in future ones, let me know. If you feel like you want to see like an ongoing rank of the various commanders that we've seen throughout the video, let me know that. You know, do you want grades? What format would you guys like to see this kind of stuff in? But next week we are going to go for the monocolored. I think there are 13 or so of those. Yeah, there are 13 monocolored legendary creatures that we can go over from Aetherdrift. But until next time, I'm Mechanized Minion. This episode was brought to you by Arcane Fortress, makers of fine TCG players. Nope, not TCG players, TCG accessories, including deck boxes, sleeves, playmats, binders, more. You want it for your game? They probably have it. There is a link in the description which will earn you 5% off your purchase and help to support the channel. Of course, you never need to spend any of your money to support the channel. You could just like, comment, subscribe, watch the videos, share them with your friends and family, and have YouTube eventually, maybe, give me some money for it. But until next time, good luck with your builds.